There are games that I've played where if I was playing Witch Doctor of Sparta over Iron Wall, I would have lost them. Hey everyone, it's Frog Slicer again. I wanted to talk about this FTK deck that's been floating around in the Edison format. So I made a video talking about Graceless, who was playing Witch Doctor of Sparta, and James Ark, who's a really highly regarded and esteemed duelist in the Edison community. He's been playing this version. And I wanted to make a video talking about why I think my version is strictly better. The biggest reason I think my version is better is because there are games that I've played where if I was playing Witch Doctor of Sparta over Iron Wall, I would have lost them. And also conceptually, there's a bunch of arguments as to why Witch Doctor is a worse win condition. So here's what Witch Doctor does. He says every time you special summon a monster from your deck, your opponent too, you'll do 500 damage to your opponent. So if you haven't used any upstart goblins, you need to send 16 frogs from your deck to the grave, basically, with Substitoad. If you had played upstart, it needs to be 22. The way you accomplish that is going to be with Exodius and Pot of Avarice. So you would think that a monster that actually helps you FTK will win you the game, where a continuous trap, like that doesn't make any sense. How are these two comparable? Well, what I do, and I explained this in my videos before, is I make a stable board state with Imperial Iron Wall. It does not get broken. And when I say that any game I would have won with this, and I could have lost with this, I've never lost a game where I make that board. So if what's important to you is actually getting the perfect FTK, where you're actually killing that first turn, the virtual FTK, by perfectly locking them out of the game and then killing them next turn, is the exact same result. So just acknowledging the power and actual unbreakability of that power board, it makes it easy to choose this one over that one. Just because this card actually does something, and this is a useless Garnet with 2,000 defense. You have plenty of 2,000 defense monsters. So specifically what you do with the Witch Doctor version is you're going to summon an Ancient Fairy Dragon. You're going to use its effect to special summon the Witch Doctor, because you've probably already used your normal summon on a Substitoad. Some of the consequences of that are, the biggest difference, I think, the reason why I think my deck is strictly better, is Unifrog. Because you have to concede your battle phase to do this effect. So you can do everything normal, exactly the same as my deck, go through your deck, draw whatever you need until you hit the Witch Doctor. And then once you've done this, you're good. But the notable difference is if they have something you really wanted to hit, if there's a backer that actually interrupts you before you go all in and actually go for the kill, you lose the Unifrog synergy. There's a few other things to note. Namely, you might want to run more frogs. Like, for example, I actually think it's worthwhile to run an extra Death Frog. 2 Death Frog, and that's kind of a benefit to both versions. Either version could run an extra Death Frog, there's arguments to it. And you might want to go ahead and run a second Treeborn Frog. I like running the bare minimum frogs because I want the best cards in my deck, so the fewest frogs possible is good. So anything you can do to make this more consistent is also inadvertently making your deck worse. So that's another reason why the combo frogs version with the Iron Wall is better than Witch Doctor of Sparta. Another thing to take into account is Upstart Goblin is a lot worse in this version, because there are some situations where you're digging as hard as you can, and if your main game plan is digging as deep as you can, then obviously you're going to use Upstarts, or maybe even all 3, before you see your win condition card. If you do it with Witch Doctor of Sparta, you may spend too many searches. The condition that we have with my combo deck is you have Exodius. Usually you'll use 1 to draw through your deck. You'll have 1 to reset everything and make your stable board, and you'll keep the third one in your deck in hand, so that second turn you combo off. So the condition you're meeting for both should be about the same. 2 Exodius per game, 1 to help you draw, 2 to actually kill. So in my version, with the bare minimum number of frogs, you can still do it, even with triple upstart. So that's something to keep in mind. It just becomes a little bit less consistent. The reality is that if you're using these upstarts, this Witch Doctor can't afford to be lower and lower in your deck. There's a bunch of calculus you could do to prove it, but in theory, it's easy to understand that if this was the last card in your deck, you aren't as screwed as if this is the last card in your deck. Because this actually does damage by spending the frogs, where you could have spent your last frog to get this and still stabilize. Another thing to note is sometimes it doesn't always go perfect like that. Like ideally, I use my upstart goblin, or sorry, my pot of avarices and one Exodius to draw through. But sometimes you have to use more. In those situations, in my version, you make the stable board and you sit on the Exodius and hope that you can bring it back somehow or that it doesn't die to begin with. In those situations, you're going to play a grinding game, but the grinding game will be stronger. This protects Stardust in a better way than this rotting in your hand would do. A few other things to note is some of the people who are playing this version of the deck, the actual FTK, they're opting into Thunder Dragons over Dandelion. I know James was on it. I'm not sure if he switched to Dandelion yet. I actually don't think this is bad. I like Thunder Dragon. I do think Thunder Dragon is inherently worse than Dandelion in this deck. You do need a plus engine of some kind, but Thunder Dragon really makes up for the fact that you probably don't want to run upstarts. If you do, it's a liability. So padding your deck with extra +1s to thin your deck so that the few poison draws that you will be able to do, that you can commit to, and the fewer placeholders you can have in the form of upstarts, the Thunder Dragons will do more work. But I think it's pretty obvious that Dandelion by itself is just plain better than Thunder Dragon, because you get more plus out of it, it enables Foolish Burial, and it's fewer cards. There is another really weird thing that is, like, you can think of these as like the win cons, like think of either of them as the head of Exodius, and then Heavy Storm or Trunade would be like the rest of the Exodius pieces. You don't really want to commit to the actual kill for Witch Doctor or the actual board with Iron Wall without using Heavy or Trunade first. So this probability of either of these being near the bottom hurts more with this Witch Doctor version. Because, like I said, it could be the fourth or third or second, maybe it's fifth. I don't know the math exactly, but if it's the last card, obviously it's just plain worse, because you might have had to go for it. You might have had to dig and spend more Exodius or Pot of Avarice uses than you can afford to, and then you have a much weaker board you're sitting on, where they can really punish you. We're here, even if you don't use the heavy. This version, my combo version, combo frogs opposed to frog FTK. Is a more resilient to bottomless trapple, because in the scenarios where you're not able to clear anything, and the only back row they have is a bottomless, that could be enough to disrupt the FTK version, where for mine I actually flat out ignore it, besides using the Death Frog to make the Stardust. But in mine, if that specific scenario happens, you have the Unifrog poke to clear that. So if you're afraid of bottomless, I normally completely ignore it, where the FTK version is actually resilient to it, or less resilient to it. I do have a few pros. Like, you do actually win first turn, and that is simpler. So the actual kill turn for the Imperial Iron Wall version is very complicated. And while I believe you can't really mess it up once you've gotten the first few steps down, it does take time. And people are much more concerned with time when it comes to grinding ladder. And when it comes to like grinding big tournaments, you don't want to have to add so much more complexity. So I actually think the versions are close enough. You're not going to see much of a noticeable difference. I did notice a lot of people playing this version are going really crazy with, like, I've seen one that was on 3 Death Frogs and 3 Beazzle Frogs, which is just an excessive amount. Like, I know you can get by with just 1 Death Frog and 1 Treeborn. You may want to run the second, or maybe even the second of both, just because you need to make an Ancient Fairy Dragon. You might need the redundant level 5, or because you need to pair it up this way, or to have 2 Beazzle Frogs and a Fishborg Blaster to make a level 7. So the configurations you need and the frogs you have to spend, that can get in your way. And again, you're thinning your deck of frogs before you even get the witch out. So these are 2 frogs that you're going to be losing before you even get going to begin with. And all those things can like have you 1,000 damage or 500 damage short. And that's why I think my version is flat out better. Because mine, you can maximize the draw. You can maximize the entire game plan with no fear. The biggest problem you're going to run into is you're going to sometimes have both heavy and Trunade. Or Dandelion might be too far down and you'll have to minus yourself more. But Thunder Dragon can still accomplish that in both versions. If that Dandelion flaw is a flaw for you, then Thunder Dragon still accomplishes the same thing. You would just be losing the Heavy Storm. A lot of this is really complicated, nuanced stuff. But this is really just trying to show that I know what I'm talking about, and I have experience with this deck. I've looked at my old replays, And you guys can go and watch any of my games because I post them all. And you can see there's a handful of them where specifically, if I had this change from Witch Doctor to Imperial Iron Wall, I would have lost those games. So last thing I want to say is a lot of people are playing this deck and talking about it just because James Ark was playing it. And I was actually kind of disappointed because about 2 or 3 months ago, James was telling me that he had an improved version of my deck. He said it actually wins first turn. And I was like, oh, that's really exciting. And I was hoping he would share it with me. He chose not to, no big deal. But I was very disappointed to find out later that it was just Witch Doctor. Because I always knew this was a thing. I just think it's strictly worse. But hey, now that this is kind of a popular thing, unfortunately, I'm probably going to have to put this in my side deck now. Just because if I run into the mirror, I need to actually FTK them or I'll lose. So thanks, James. But yeah, that's it for me. If any of you guys have any reasons why you think that my version is wrong, I'm happy to debate in the comment section. If anyone wants to do that crazy calculus, please share it with me. But I think it's pretty clear that all things being equal, this is a better card. But yeah, thanks guys.